Welcome to the Everything Board Games podcast. We've got the scoop on the latest board game news, reviews, and interviews. So gather your family and friends and get ready for a board game good time. Plus, don't forget to check out our sister site for the best board game giveaways, thegiveawaygeek.com. Ready, board gamers? Let's get things rolling.
Welcome to Everything Board Games podcast. Today we have a treat for you. The developer of a new game coming to Kickstarter pretty soon is Nikolas, and this game is Maeshowe or something like that. I always get it. I think I mispronounced it. But we have the developer on the line with us today on Everything Board Games. Is that right, Nikolas? Is that how you fall in line with this game?
Yeah, that's right. Hi. Nice to be here. And I think your pronunciation was pretty good. I think that's pretty close.
Oh, good. Thank you so much for joining us on Everything Board Games podcast. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, before we dive into this game and everything about it, let's rewind a little bit if we could. How did you get into playing tabletop board games, Nikolas?
Yeah, so as a child, I really enjoyed games. I played a little bit of Magic when I was a fairly young child, maybe like 7-ish, 8. Liked board games, and then when I was 11, I sort of got really passionate about it through tabletop RPGs. I grew up in Sweden, and there was a big sort of role-playing boom in that time. This must have been very late 90s, probably 99, where I picked up my first RPG book, which was Drakar och Demoner, which is sort of the, I guess, sort of spin-off from Dungeons and Dragons, but had a little bit of a different system, but also your sort of a typical fantasy stuff, but with a bit of a sort of a Norse mythology twist to it. And so my friends and I, we started playing that a lot. And then at some point, we also did a little bit of board gaming and a sort of a mix of both. And that's sort of what got the ball rolling of actually me being interested in tabletop gaming.
Awesome. And what are you playing these days?
So I still play some RPGs. Now with during Corona, we've been doing some online RPGs. I play some Mutant Year Zero. I GM that. I play a lot of board games. I also play some. I picked up Magic again 3 years ago, so I play a lot of Magic the Gathering, mostly online now. But as far as board games go, I tend to like the things I guess some call it a merry trash. Let's say thematic games, but the type of things where you'll have dice rolling, there will be some variance, there might be a high level player interaction, sort of the Fantasy Flight line of gaming. I tend to be what I'm drawn towards.
Okay, awesome. And then somehow you dove into developing games and whatnot?
Yeah, so I came on just as a playtester for Dragon Dawn Production in, I believe, 2017. Probably should have checked those dates beforehand, but it was during the Traitor Guard expansion, which was, I believe, the first expansion to be kickstarted separately by Dragon Dawn Production for what I believe is the most famous title, Perdition's Mouth Abyssal Rift, which is a sort of Euro-inspired dungeon crawler. And during that, I did a lot of playtesting, gave a lot of feedback. At some point, the designer said, well, this is pretty interesting. Could you maybe work on a scenario or something? And then I also did some scenarios on my own later on and was very active, especially during the revised edition, because there were a lot of new content coming at that point to the game. So I did the so-called scenario pack, which was sort of a mini campaign for beginners. I did a lot of development and playtesting for a lot of the scenarios in that campaign. And so that's how I sort of got into that. Then I did a little bit of small things. Next to that, I worked on a 2-player variant for a card game called Winning, which also came out a little bit after that, and then have been sort of involved in many other games, just giving feedback, play testing, and sometimes doing some maybe light development. But this is now my first title that I am sort of the lead developer on, and I take a larger responsibility on.
Well, there you go. So are you doing development and designing games full time then?
I do not. I do it as a part-time job. I am otherwise a music teacher.
Oh, cool. Music teacher. Awesome. Well, that's cool that you're able to dive into the hobby a little bit more. Now, word on the street is you guys are about to launch a new game on Kickstarter called Maeshowe. How do you What can you tell us about this game?
Yeah, so that's what I was alluding to earlier when I said this is my first game when I'm lead developer. So Maeshowe is a 1-to-2 card game, 1-to-2 player card game. It is cooperative if you play 2-player, obviously cooperative as well when you play it solo, and it's based on it's based on real events that were long considered to be myths. There's this tomb of Maeshowe in Scotland, which was talked about in the Orkney sagas, these old Viking sagas, as being a place that had been discovered by Vikings, and these sagas had been discovered and they were known of, but it wasn't sort of it wasn't. It was contested whether it had actually happened or not. And once they found this tomb of Maeshowe, they actually found graffiti, like runes scratched into the wall, sort of Viking graffiti, telling the story of these Vikings that had actually been there. So the way it happened is that they came there and they were caught in a snowstorm. So they went to Scotland to loot, probably to find some treasure there, and then they got caught by this snowstorm and they found themselves sort of digging their way into Maeshowe, into this tomb, through the roof, and they just fell down into the tomb just to find shelter. And once they found themselves in this tomb, they obviously realized that they also had to get out at some point. And the actual passage that you were supposed to get into the tomb, normally it had collapsed. So at that point, they had to start digging the way out. And this is what the game is depicting. So you're playing these 11th century Vikings digging your way out of this ancient tomb in Scotland with your bare hands and with whatever tools you have available to you.
Okay, and is there any conflict besides not having any tools and using your hands only?
So there's not conflict in that sense that you're playing against someone or so. So it's as I said, it's a card game. You have the sort of core deck of cards has 36 cards. You start the game by drawing 5 cards, and each card has a effect when you play it, and it has an effect when you discard it. And during your turn, you will have to play 1 card and discard 1 card. And then depending on what cards you have in hand, you will choose to sort of do those in a different order to sort of progress yourself forward. And the goal of the game is to sort of dig yourself out of this tomb, which you then do by playing a specific card calling the Excavate card. And if you play 4 of those in a row, a sort of an uninterrupted row, then you get to remove passage tokens from the game board. And once you've removed X number of passage tokens, depending on your difficulty setting, you will then have escaped. Then, of course, there's a variety of other cards in there that are things like you find a treasure that distracts you. You find a goose that flies into the roof that you can take to gain more food. You can eat that food to heal yourself, and so on and so forth. There's a variety of other card effects that you have to work with to sort of keep yourself alive until you can find the strength to dig yourself out of the tomb.
And does it end when all the 36 cards are gone out of the deck, or?
Correct. So you can either lose by running out of cards and not being able to play anymore, or you can lose by running out of health. Both are pretty equally likely, honestly. There are a lot of cards that make you lose life, and you often find yourself in positions where you have cards that are very difficult to play, so you end up discarding them instead. But when discarding them, you also lose life, and so you find yourself in this constant push and pull of wanting to find a opportune moment to play these 4 Excavate cards in a row. But while you're playing those, you're not gaining any life. So you have to have a lot of health so that you can afford discarding other cards that will likely lose you health. So there's a lot of like resource management, a lot of risk management, a little bit of push your luck involved there.
Okay, awesome. It sounds pretty cool. So in developing it, or in being the head developer and developing it, did much change since when the designer got it to you guys?
Yeah, I think so. It definitely did. So those who are interested can actually see it was a print-and-play game that's up on Board Game Geek. So we have it up as a separate posting now. It's called Maeshowe and Orkney Saga. That is the version we are now kickstarting. But before that, it was just Maeshowe. And that you can actually see on on BGG as well. And there it was a print and play that could be played with a normal deck of cards. And that deck then of, 54 cards then has now been reduced to 36. So we have trimmed down the deck quite a bit. And I've also done quite a lot of changes to the mechanics. I won't go into too much detail exactly what I changed, but I do a developer blog on BGG where I go into a little bit more detail of what I've been doing. It's called a Northern Traveler. You can find a link to it on both of the Maeshowe BGG pages. But to sort of give you a brief overlook of what I've been doing, it's been a lot about streamlining. The game could potentially be pretty long in the early versions of it, like 45 to sometimes even up to an hour. And it could become a little bit of a grind, like a little bit of a repetition, because you could at that point actually go through the deck several times. And you had actions that allow you to do that. The problem was if you ran out of action, you would then lose, but you also had the opportunity to regain these actions, which made the game sometimes almost impossible to win, but not yet lost. And just to and that was one of the first things that I looked at, to just finding like very defined cut points when the game is over, where you can't continue anymore, to reduce the play time, and to also reduce the deck a little bit, to just sort of trim things down a little bit, just trim the fat and make it a little bit more of a dense experience.
Awesome. It sounds pretty cool. A good experience that you're able to do that. And it sounds like it's changed quite a bit. So per se, somebody's played that one or they haven't. When it comes to Maeshowe, what makes this game pop is when my audience should go check out. And if they like what they see, back it on Kickstarter.
So what your question is, what is sort of the compelling feature of it, or?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, so I think, so we have, there will be on the Kickstarter page as well, we have actually a small list of sort of the specific selling points that we think are worth stressing here. So one, I think, is the quick play time. So we put 30 minutes on the box. We've been getting some feedback from previewers now that maybe that was a little bit over the top. I think it's actually rather more like a 20-minute game, maybe 15. So it has a very quick playtime. A lot of replayability, partly because of how the cards come out. You will use, since all cards are multi-use, you will use them in different ways every time you play. Plus, as I was speaking of earlier, there are some mini expansions, and there will be 3 of those in the core game, potentially more unlocked through stretch goals. And those mini expansions you can actually shuffle in. And each mini expansion has a potential alternate setup. So there's a variety of combinations that you can play that I think is just creates a lot of replay value here. Second, it has a very gritty theme. It's a little bit more adult. It will be a little bit more graphic, and realistic, the look of the cards. So I think some will enjoy that it has a little bit of a different feel than, say, some other card games of this type. And I think it plays really well with 2 players as well. So it's a very different experience playing solo. So if you play maybe some solo games, but also like to maybe play with a partner and play some 2-player games, I think this is a good one that will give you a lot of replayability, not only through those expansions, as I said, but also that you can play it solo and co-op, and it's a distinctly different experience.
Okay, so that's pretty cool. And you said with the art and stuff, is it still family friendly, or what age would you recommend this game to?
So there's some graphic violence. There is a goose being slaughtered on one of the cards. I think that's from 13. Generally, that's the recommendation in the US when there's some graphic violence, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, so nothing too horrible. Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. Now, this will be on Kickstarter running through the 21st of January through when?
I think it goes for 10 days. That is admittedly not my area, but I think we're going to do a 10 days or 2 weeks campaign.
Okay, so that makes sense. That's awesome. And So this is awesome. So if anybody's listening, if you're listening, make sure you go ahead and check out the campaign, whether it's launched or if it's about to be launched. We'll have links in the show notes so you can find it easier. Now, mine is coming there to your hometown, Nikolas, to find out, to stalk you. How can people go about keeping up with you and everything you guys are doing over there with the games?
Well, so the best way is probably to go on Twitter. Dragon Dawn Production has its own Twitter page. I'm also on Twitter under Philip Ubik Dick. You can also just Google my name and you will find my Twitter account. Nikolas Patrakka. Other than that, we have there's the Dragon Dawn Production homepage, ddpgames.com. Also, my developer blog is posted there. And of course, I think one of the best ways, especially if you want to interact with us and have like questions directly about the game and so, is to go on to Board Game Geek and find Maeshowe and Orkney Saga, which is the page for the sort of re-implementation of the game, and there just post something in the forums. We're very happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, and if you give me those links, I can make sure I include them in the show notes so they can do that. And speaking of the things coming up, per se, somebody listening later on down the road after the Kickstarter and everything, is there any secrets in your back pocket of other games you guys might be working on that you can share with us?
So there are some secrets, which I obviously cannot necessarily share, but I know we have there's a game on politics that came out last year that might be getting an expansion, but I don't think I'm allowed to say more than that. We also have a Perdition's Mouth Soulspire, which is the big box big box expansion coming for Perdition's Mouth Abyssal Rift, which we will be kickstarting hopefully in May. I think that's pretty fixed at this point. I've been doing some development work on that one as well. I think it's going to be a very fascinating dungeon crawl experience. And to that, I'm working on my own game called Beyond the Rift, which is a sort of a sequel story-wise to Perdition's Mouth Abyssal Rift. But it's also a card game in its own right that has something that I, for now, call the Evolving Deck System, where each hero will have its own unique card deck of 26 cards. And of those, 16 cards are tied to specific body parts of the heroes. So let's say you play the warrior Bastian. He will have 3 cards in his deck that are connected to his head, 3 to his right arm, 3 to his left arm, body, and legs, and so forth. Once you equip items during the game, let's say you find a broadsword, you equip it to your right hand. And then you remove all the cards that says right hand on them from his deck, and you add in the broadsword cards in its stead. So it has a sort of a very streamlined version of deck building, I guess you could say. That one will create a very unique gameplay, I would say, for a card game. For an adventure
whereabouts is that in the process?
It's very far ahead. It's possible to do some play testing. We have print and play kits that we send out to people who are interested. So anyone interested in that, definitely let us know either over Twitter, or I will give you some other contact ways that we can put in the show notes. I'm not sure right now which would be the best way, but that's pretty far along. We have 5 heroes that are in some stages of development. 3 have sort of finished print and play cards. There is 1.5 full campaigns you can play, and this is coming in Q3 of 2021 to Kickstarter.
Okay, sounds like you guys are quite busy over there. But yeah, we don't want to keep you all night, or I guess all day where you're at. But we really appreciate you coming on Everything Board Games to talk all about Maeshowe with us today, and also some of the other stuff you're working on, especially Beyond the Rift, Perdition's Mouth card game. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
No problem.
Thanks for listening to Everything Board Games. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast so you never miss our news, reviews, and interviews. And check out our sister site for amazing giveaways at thegiveawaygeek.com. Until then, keep on rolling.